So welcome to today's Dealmaker success story. We have Scott Todd here on the line. We're going to learn how he was able to do his first deal and raise a bunch of money, how he partnered to get that done, what his background is, how he went from where he was to obviously having no multifamily to actually doing his first multifamily deal and actually raising a good chunk of money to close on a 120 unit deal in Indiana. And so we're going to go through that journey from single family, as a lot of our journeys are, single family investing. We struggle with scaling the single family flips and rentals like I did, and we'll find out about Scott here today as well. To multifamily, and maybe had to struggle with some limiting beliefs and challenges along the way. We want to know about that, and then we want to do a little bit of a deep dive on the deal, how he found it, how he joined ventured, how he raised the money. And so with that, let's bring in our guest. What's going on, Scott?
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me today. Good to be here.
Yeah. What is your professional background?
Yes, I am in the biotech sales and marketing space. I've been there about 20 years. So W-2 guy, launching several small companies. Some did very well and were purchased. And along that ride as well, I spent about 18 years in the single family space. So I did a lot of fix and flipping, wholesaling of properties. I actually got up to 9 units at one point. That was the largest studio property that I did own, and did a little hard money lending in there as well, right up to the period of 2008. And really had a pretty radical financial distressful period there. And got out of the space very abruptly. And I would say it took quite a few years off from real estate. Really didn't do much investing for a while there.
So you're a busy executive. I imagine you've been in the biotech for a while. You're probably making good money. Why are you doing stuff on the side with real estate? What were you trying to do there? What was your motivation of just real estate in general?
Yeah, I think in the biotech space at one point there was an opportunity. If you were at a startup and you were purchased by a Pfizer or whatever, you could do pretty well, right? You could advance the path toward more financial freedom. But right around the time of COVID, things started to change pretty dramatically in the space. I actually experienced two companies that flamed out pretty radically, didn't get approved by the FDA. I was sent packing on two different occasions. And so the second time that happened, I had 7 months literally without a job. And the thought of returning to real estate, there'd always been a part of me that had thought, what if I tried this on a bigger level? The idea of single family. I had some success there, but it was pretty clear to me early on that it's going to be pretty hard to scale this to the point where I can really find that true financial freedom. It's going to take something like multifamily to make that happen.
So you came to that conclusion that not everybody on this webinar may be in the same space that you are. What problems did you find with flipping and rentals and the stuff that you were doing when you say you couldn't scale? Practically speaking, what did that look like for you? Not scaling or not being
Yeah.
able to scale.
Yeah, a lot of my properties were spread out. I didn't have them all on the same street or in the same neighborhood. So there's just a lot of logistics to that. A lot of times if I went in, if something went wrong on the property, and you're only maybe cash flowing a couple $100 a month, and something went wrong, all of a sudden it could go from a break even to maybe even a loss on the deal. Not being a very good property manager myself, I realized by falling in and out of small claims court several times per month, I wasn't a very good property manager, and I was trying to wear all these hats and fly solo, which as I realized wasn't the best use of my time.
So how did you come to the conclusion that multifamily is the way to go, right? Because there's a lot of resistance. People think it's a very advanced strategy. They don't have the money for it. How long did that take, and what mental, hoops did you jump through in your mind before you said, yeah, I gotta get out of this and I gotta get into that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I had the pain from 2008, right? I take a lot of personal responsibility for just not probably seeking the right type of framework for having the right team, and reaching out for assistance. And then probably the pain from the biotech flame out with these two other companies. I think that just kind of led me to a point where I'd been thinking about multifamily, and I knew people who were doing multifamily, and seemed to be doing very, very well. So I think the series of conversations with others, and then just realizing, I've had a lot of experiences here and I haven't been able to transform that into something better, but, multifamily just kept coming about. And then I actually kind of came across your books or sort of serendipitously through another friend. Picked that up one day and kind of read through that thing in about a day or two. And, a lot of the things that you were sharing from your experience were resonating with me. And, a lot of that made sense. And that was kind of part of my motivation to kind of reach out and get some help.
The question is, why didn't you get started earlier? So you already knew about multifamily. You knew people who were doing it, were successful, and it took you reading my book and doing a bunch of stuff. But what in your mind, what held you back? Because it's not like you didn't know about it. You
Yeah.
see it. You talk to someone who does it. You're like, not for me. But why? What was that conversation in your head like?
Yeah, I think there's some limiting beliefs in there. I tried this once before in the real estate, single family, and if I couldn't do it there, then how am I gonna make this happen in the multifamily? Maybe not smart enough, not experienced enough. Maybe it's like a mutual secret club of investors, and are they going to let me in? Are they going to share all the secrets of multifamily that kind of keeping that closely guarded? Lots of just limiting beliefs, I would say, in my own head that needed to be examined, and that's probably the foundation for a lot of it.
So limiting beliefs. Okay, let's talk about it because I want to shine a light on this stuff because so you were thinking that you had maybe some negative experience with real estate. It's obviously a limiting belief. I'm going to get into this new strategy. I could have a similar experience. What other limiting beliefs were you struggling with? Because you're a successful guy. What can possibly
Sure.
stop you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's just I think just not just taking that first move, right? Sort of that analysis by paralysis, probably, reading the books and, kind of getting that initial knowledge of, this is great, right? This is probably the next step of where would need to be. But just fear, right? Just fear. There's a part of me that realizes, yeah, I'm going to have to take some action here and put myself at risk again and hope that what I've learned is going to pay off. But until I do that, right, nothing's going to happen. Brokers aren't going to call me, Scott, where are you? We've got all these great properties for you, right? I'm realizing I've got to take responsibility for this. If I don't take action and if I don't invite other people in to help and mentor and guide that process, then, nothing's going to happen, right? It's just going to stay the way that it is.
So what changed, right? Because you knew about multifamily, right? And yes, you read my book, but there's people that read books all the time. They even pay money to go to seminars, but they don't actually really take any action. In why
Yeah.
did you take action when you did? What happened? Like, do you remember the exact moment when you said,
Yeah.
I'm going to do this? Like, what was going on?
Yeah, I think I was reading your book and I got to the part about the difference between single family, kind of the metaphor between single solo sport and compared to multifamily as more of a team sport. And I think that's where something clicked for me. And I realized, you know what, I've never taken that approach before. And I think Michael's not only right, but I think that's where I need to go. If I'm gonna make this happen, I'm gonna need help. And so I reached out to the mentoring program and kind of got things going from there.
Before we get to that, because there's now two approaches. There's a person who decides they're going to do multifamily and they decide to take action, but there's two paths that sometimes people take. And one of them is, I'm going to do it myself. That's what I did. And now you had real estate background, but you decided, no, I actually want to get some help. So did you think about doing it yourself? In other words, why did you decide that you needed help when you probably could have done it on your own, or at least tried?
Yeah. I think just having enough pain from that prior experience. I had a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, all that. I had dabbled in some multifamily before and tried to purchase property and it didn't work for me. So I've realized maybe the wisdom comes through learning, right? Sometimes there's some suffering in there, maybe some losses, but just through all those prior experiences, just kind of, you get to that point, right, where you've just kind of had enough of, you're sick and tired of being sick and tired of doing the same thing and getting, similar types of results. So just probably a slow learner, but, finally I'm grateful to have gotten to the point where, hey, there is a different way. And if I'm willing to try, then people are out there who can help.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so you decide that you were going to do this, and what you really liked about it is a team-based approach, which means you're not doing it on your own, which is cool. And you had some negative experience in real estate. You're like, well, if I'm going to do this, I better get some help. And then you joined our mentoring program. In your mind, specifically, what help why did you do it? I know you wanted to get help, but in what ways in your mind would working with an experienced team help your journey?
Yeah, I mean, obviously getting feedback, right? Having the opportunity to reach out to someone like Garrett, who's a wonderful coach, grateful to have Garrett in my life, to be able to reach out and say, here's what I'm working on, to have those touch points, whether that's weekly or, on an as needed basis. He gave me just a tremendous amount of direction on how to get started and, set the expectations right away. He trying to be organized with activity, lots of things that I really hadn't been doing before. So I think through that process of just, he got me off to a great start, and, is a very encouraging coach, right? We're going to break this up into pieces. This is doable. Other people have done this before. And, obviously I loved your book. So the way that you were teaching from the book also gave me a tremendous amount of confidence that there's going to be more knowledge, right? I'm going to be drinking out of the fire hose here for a while, but if it's the same approach that's in the book and, even more comprehensive, then, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah, former software engineer, so I'm a very simple 1-2 step kind of guy. So for sure. Now, one thing I'd ask you about though, because we get this a lot, how did you find the time to do all this stuff? Like, because you haven't done real estate in a little while, and a lot of times we hear this, hey, let's I don't have the time for this kind of stuff. Like, how did you find the time to do it? And how much time did you spend working on this thing?
Yeah, I'm a big believer. I've loved the book. One of my favorite reads is the book Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of my approach to multifamily has been to just break things up into small chunks, and, keep it simple, right? Just, I get up, I'm an early riser, I get up sometimes at 4:30 in the morning, I have my coffee and, work out. And then I've got that time where, it's all mine, right? I can do with that time whatever I want. And so I dedicated the first 2 hours of each day before things got kind of crazy and carried away. A lot of nighttime. I cut out social media and TV for a while. When I started analyzing how I'm spending my day, right? There's a lot of stuff that I think we do that we think is productive. So through that process of just streamlining, I freed up, lots of blocks of time in the morning, in the evening, and on the weekends. And the modules are very straightforward. There's a lot of content, right? But it's very efficiently done. And, it doesn't take that much to get through. And, they're designed to get you up and running and taking action right away.
Yeah, atomic habits, it's really not a time management problem. And same thing getting to multifamily, anything meaningful in life, it's really a priority problem. How did you make this a priority? In other words, why was this a priority? Did you maybe talk to, I don't know, your family about this? Like, why did you make it such a priority? Why did you make all these changes to your life to make room for this?
I think coming back to the pain of my past experience, one of the resonating thoughts that kept returning to me, Michael, is that if I'm in a place where some things have happened, right? And I realize there's an opportunity to take those experiences, as painful as they've been, and transform that into something more beneficial for myself, right? To give me some fulfillment through that learning process, but also to, more than anything for me, to create a legacy for my family, to kind of build that and maybe share that, even maybe teach my son at some point how to do what I'm doing as I succeed, and then give back, through all that as part of the bigger picture, to give back to community and, kind of complete the loop there, right? Through that transformation process.
I would talk about your deal, but we always talk about the actual outcome. What we don't really recognize is the steps that we take to get to that outcome, but also maybe the small wins along the way. Can you talk a little bit about the whole process and maybe some of the small wins and milestones that you achieved on the way to that deal, which we're going to get to in a second?
One of the things that jumped out from the teaching was the relationship with brokers. When I first started getting into, the process of, let's get this rolling with activity, and, some of the teaching that's in the course about, there's that reaching out, right, for that initial contact, but then there's this, how do you keep that relationship going with the broker? And what I learned through some of that was that it's a very enjoyable process, right? I mean, to just initiate that relationship and kind of be able to follow up and provide value, and asking questions, and realizing one of the successful points that I learned was that um, it's a win-win situation, right? There are ways I can add value through the process of building that relationship. So I've got a lot of pretty good connections that turn out to be brokers. And if I compare that to what I was doing before I got help and was educated, where I'm kind of reaching out and what's in it for me, right? Probably much more of a self-centered approach to finding property. And then now I've kind of come full circle, I would say, during the process of learning how it's those little things, right, of how to communicate, how to follow up, how to ask the right questions, that kind of has allowed me to maybe separate myself in some ways from some of the other people that they're probably taking calls from every day. So I'd call that a kind of that learning of the more of the relationship process and how it works, a pretty small and significant success.
And developing confidence to talk to brokers, right? And in your case, also investors. Now, we typically talk about, I mean, normally when you go through our program, you're going to learn the fundamentals of apartments from A to Z, everything. But you kind of pick a career track, right? There's going to be more the deal finder career track and more the capital raiser career track, typically from the way you are, your personality is, like just the way you are. And did you find yourself resisting certain activity, or gravitating towards one or the other, capital raiser or deal finder?
Sure, it's interesting that coming into the course, it's totally focused on finding a property, being the lead GP on that property. I had several offers that I had made. They were pretty good offers and were getting pretty close to possible acceptance. And if I'm being honest with myself, I had actual dread in many cases that the offers were going to be accepted.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I had all the fear was because I knew deep down that if the offer was accepted, I'd done nothing to prepare myself for the capital side. I really had very little knowledge. I hadn't reached out and built a network, hadn't had any conversations with other people. And, I've talked to others who've shared that same common fear. So fortunately for me, I think there came a point where I realized there was a distinction, right? The capital raiser and the person who's doing the due diligence, or maybe spending time analyzing deals, we're not always the same people, right? They may be part of that team. So I actually had a interesting conversation with a Marcus and Milchat broker back in June of last year. And he said, hey, I know we're looking at all these properties, but have you ever considered the possibility of being coming in as a limited partner on a larger deal? And I said, well, not really, but what are you talking about? So he sent me the prospectus. I took a look at the property, went out and drove it, studied the financials, talked to my coach, and then, next thing you know, I'm a limited partner on this 128 unit Class B building in Kokomo, Indiana, about 25 miles north of Indianapolis. And I thought, well, that's not exactly how I thought I'd come into the program, or where I would evolve on the way to a possible deal. But that's just kind of the way we started.
And then, so now we're talking about the first deal. So you kind of got into it a little bit, but then what happened? Because you obviously ended up with, so what happened?
Yeah. So of course I ended up, got a Zoom call arranged with the lead GP, who was Chad, who, I did a little digging around on Chad, and I realized, oh, he's a former Michael Blanc student. I watched one of his interviews that she did with him probably 2 or 3 years back. And I thought, okay, check that box. That's a good thing. Had my one-on-one with Chad, and did the limited partnership. And then about 3 or 4 days later, he calls me into his office, and he said, I've raised a lot of money for this deal, but he said, I'm running this company. We seem to have some shared interests here. I think I could see you raising capital for me. Have you ever thought about that? And I said, well, yeah, a little bit. And he said, well, how much money do you think you could raise? And I said, I don't know. How much money do you think I could raise? And he said, well, could you raise $300,000 in 30 days? I said, I don't know. Let's give it a shot. So, I went out, I talked to my first friend, and he said, all right, I'll give you $200,000. And I thought, wow, this thing's pretty easy. I just got to go out and, have a couple of cups of coffee, whatever. So yeah, that was the first encounter that I had. And then I went almost 30 days from there before I had another investment.
Beginner's luck. But so
Yes.
you ended up raising what, about $800,000?
Yeah. So we started it, we got the 330 days. And then he said, well, let's see what you can do between now and the end of the year. So I ended up raising a total of 800,000 in about 4 months.
All right. So you had focused more on the deal finding and not so much on the capital raising, but you obviously learned about the capital raising in the course and all that stuff. So you kind of know what you're talking about. But talk about the activity. What was it? What did you do to raise money? What did your cadence look like? What did you do every single day, every single week?
Yeah, that's great. So I just went pretty old school. I just got my Excel spreadsheet out. I opened up my iPhone. I just poured every possible contact that I could into there. And someone along the way had suggested, don't try to screen these people. Don't try to look at each name and say, oh, this person will definitely invest. This person won't. Just don't prejudge it. So I put everybody in there. And getting back to the atomic habits philosophy, I decided, my goal is to meet 3 to 5 people per week for a cup of coffee. And I thought that's doable, right? And if I do that, every week for 2 to 3 months, that's a lot of presentations. So really just started picking up the phone. My approach was, hey, I've got something really exciting in the multifamily space that I've gotten involved in recently. I'd really love to get your feedback on this. And it's been a while since we've caught up together. Obviously, if you know somebody after you've seen this information who could possibly have an interest, I'd love to have you introduce me to them, and we could kind of keep that conversation going. But what would you think to just getting together, next Wednesday at 8:30 for some coffee? And surprisingly, I had a really high success with that. I'd say 75% of the time, I was able to get that meeting, to make that happen. I think it really took the pressure off by just kind of approaching it that way versus, hey, I need $100,000. You're the first person that came to mind. Let's sit down and find out if you want to do this deal, right? Definitely not. I don't think that would have been the best approach to take getting started.
Yeah, so we have this deal tracker, as you probably already know, where we track these activities like brokers, deals, and also on the capital side. So you're doing exactly that, which is you create a spreadsheet, my favorite thing, and you had goals. I need 3 to 5 meetings a week, which means you have to contact probably 10 to 15 people, email them, text them, call them, set these meetings up, and now you're getting reps, right? The first one, maybe, well, you got lucky in the first one because a buddy of yours who gave you $200,000 without you trying much because he likes you. Yeah. Right. But then in the beginning, it was probably a little awkward to have conversations. How did the conversations go by the 10th time you had an investor meeting? How was that 10th conversation different than the first?
Yeah, so much less fear, right? I think that's that getting started, and again, getting back to that initial fear, right? I've got to take some action here. It's possible they could say no, or whatever the worst possible scenario I could possibly imagine might be, right? And then talking that through, I think, there's one thing to have it in your head, right? Like, I know what this information is, but then when you're face to face with somebody, and you're presenting that for the first time, the second time, even the 10th time, right? Realizing that everybody's different. The second guy I talked to, it's a 32-page prospectus. We went through the entire 32-page prospectus. I mean, he wanted he probably had 50 questions. I mean, he blew me out of the water. I think I had to go home and take a nap for a half hour after that conversation, and then there were others where, we didn't even we'd open maybe one page in an hour and a half of, he just wanted to, see if he trusted me, right? It was more about the relationship with that person. So I think that was part of the learning. I know you've mentioned that before, learning how to raise capital, right? There's no substitute for going out there, having those conversations and realizing there are lots of different personalities. Everybody's needs are different. Their timing's different. And so getting a better feel for how to read people by the 10th time versus being scared about, more focused on myself again, right? How am I going to get this across? What am I going to say? What does he think of me, right? A lot of change from that first time, moving down along the continuum of conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's just amazing what repetition does. Atomic habits, repetition, practice makes perfect, and that's a great way to do that. Are you able to share some of the results of the deal for you financially? Can you share acquisition fees or projected cash flow for you personally?
Yeah. So the this particular one, it's a 5-year hold project with an 18.5% annual rate of return that's projected. The equity multiple is almost 2. It's 1.93. $100,000 on the limited partner side was 2% of ownership on the LP side. And then the $800,000 that I was able to raise was out of $5.5 million. So that was right around 15% of the total equity. And then there was, in this case, there was 30% carved out of the general partnership specifically for fundraising. So I got 30% of 15%, which is 4.5% of the GP share. And then I also received 4.5% of the acquisition fee. It was a $339,000 acquisition fee times 4.5%. So right around $16,000 acquisition fee.
Nice.
For raising the capital.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And so looking back on your journey up at this point, reading the book, deciding you get on, what would you say? How has working with an experienced team like ours, for example, how has that made a difference for you? And maybe compare that to if you had done it yourself. But what are the things that stand out for you?
Yeah, I think just the opportunity to reach out and get feedback from the coaches here in the program. One thing I know hasn't been touched on yet is there's a wonderful network within the program, and that's one of the things that Garrett encouraged me to do very early on. Was he gave me a list of about 20 people, but he said, hey, there's no limit here. There's no downside to reaching out to everybody who you think could be connected in some way if you establish those connections. And so I've also been a big initiator and proponent of making new friends and contacts through the mentoring network group as well. And so I think just that team, right? When you think of team, that could be 2 people. A team could be 2 people, right? But a team could be 20 people. It could be 30 people, right? And then I think through a lot of these conversations is being open to one thing, right? From that conversation, right? You could just be starting the call thinking it's going to go one direction, almost like getting in and buying your first apartment, right? And then realizing, hey, if I'm open and adaptable and I'm paying attention to, what's going on and what this other person needs as well, and we're trying to mutually try to add value through our conversation, typically there's at least one thing that I've observed that can come out of those exchanges and, maybe take you in the same direction that you already planned, or possibly open up a new and unique opportunity that might even be better or add to what I'm already doing.
Yeah. So what's next for you think?
I think learning how to raise capital it's definitely something that was really a lot harder than I expected, but I really enjoyed the heck out of it. And it was very fulfilling. And, I'm at this point where, hey, I've had this N of 1, right? I had one experience, that someone gave me an opportunity to partner with them and I did add value, and there's loyalty right there. I mean, I'm so grateful to Chad for giving me that opportunity, and I'd like to keep that ball rolling with Chad as much as possible. But I don't really know what that looks like. I just know that, capital raising is certainly a very valuable and important part of this whole process. And I'd like to kind of continue and discover ways to kind of make that grow.
Yeah. So as a homework here for this thing, take your trusted spreadsheet out and figure out how much money you think you can raise. And now you kind of a little bit know how the GP structure is structured, and you can kind of translate, for every dollar, every $1 million raised, what you can get from that. And I think you'll find it's very interesting, especially if you take the acquisition fees, cash flow, projected cash flow, and also the profit at the end. And so the career track here you're describing is really one more of a fund manager, right? So you're a fund manager where you actually now you focus and concentrate on capital raising, and you build essentially multiple funds, and you keep investing with Chad or with other operators, and you really focus on raising capital. I think it's a great career track. We see them basically, one is more the operator side, one's more the capital raiser side, and this is why people joint venture so much. And I think when you do that exercise, you'll notice how you'll realize how incredibly profitable and lucrative this business can be.
Sounds great.